Is an electric car really cheaper than a petrol one?
Well, this is the new Mini.
And this is also the new Mini. But although the two look very similar on the outside, they are in fact very different underneath.
Because this one is powered by petrol, but that one is powered by electricity.
In this video, we're taking both of these new Minis on a road trip from London to Birmingham and back to find out how they compare in all the important areas.
And we're also going to crunch all of the real world numbers to see if it really can be cheaper to own an electric Mini than a petrol one. So Will, what are we doing today?
Well, Doug, Mini has just launched not one, but two new Mini hatchbacks, the petrol version that I'm driving and the electric version that you're in. So we thought we would take them both on a mini road trip to find out more about the differences.
And where are we going?
Well, we're going to be starting in Twickenham in London, and the first thing we'll do is take these Minis home to the Mini factory in Oxford. From there, we will head up to Birmingham. That will give us a chance to drive these cars on the motorway and also in the city. And then tomorrow we will head back down to London via some good old-fashioned country roads to find out which of these Minis is more fun to drive, or as Mini would probably say, which has more go-kart feel.
And roughly how many miles are we going to be doing in the next couple of days?
The total trip is about 250 miles.
Okay, the official electric range of this electric Mini is about 250 miles, so I'm probably going to have to stop for a charge somewhere, aren't I? But I assume you don't have to worry about anything like that, do you?
I think you will have to stop for a charge. I don't even think I'm going to have to put petrol in this because the tank is easily big enough to do 250 miles. And I reckon this might actually work out slightly cheaper when we crunch the numbers at the end as well.
Well, there's only one way to find out. So Will, we've made it to the Mini factory here in Oxford. What do we need to know about these new Minis?
Well, as most people will know, the Mini was originally a tiny and very innovative small car built by the British Motor Corporation, and it was first launched back in 1959. Nowadays, of course, Mini is a brand rather than a specific model, and it's been owned by BMW since the year 2000. And it not only builds hatchbacks, but also SUVs. It's this hatchback, though, with its now iconic retro design that most people are going to think of if you tell someone that you've bought a Mini, though,
of course.
I would say. This is the fourth generation version of the new Mini. The first one was back in 2001, although it does actually share quite a lot in common with the previous generation model that was launched in 2014, to the point that you could almost consider it a heavy facelift, not that it looks massively different on the outside. The biggest change is probably the triangular shaped taillights. And you can have it with a choice of two engines. So there's the Cooper C, that has a 3-cylinder 1.5 litre petrol with 154 brake horsepower. And then there is this Cooper S. So that has a 4-cylinder 2 litre turbocharged petrol engine with 201 brake horsepower. And it's built right here at Mini's Oxford plant, which I'm assuming your car is as well.
I'll explain that later on, but for now, what you need to know about the electric version is that this is actually the result of a partnership between Mini and Great Wall Motors.
Funky Cat.
Well, yes, they are the Chinese makers behind not the Funky Cat wheel, it's the GWM Aura 03.
Sorry, yes, that's
Admittedly, until recently, it was called the Aura Funky Cat. And these two cars really look pretty similar on the outside, don't they?
They do.
There are a couple of differences. You might notice you can't get any plastic wheel arch trim on this electric version.
Door handles.
The door handles are flush on the electric version, they're not on this petrol. But fundamentally outside, they do look very similar. Inside, they're pretty much identical as well. But underneath, they are completely different cars. This is built on an electric car platform, whereas the previous Mini Electric was basically the petrol version with the engine ripped out and a battery put in instead. So this should, in theory, be a less compromised electric car than that previous Mini Electric. Like this petrol version, there are two different Mini Electrics you can buy. There's the Cooper E, which is the entry-level version, and it gets a 36.2 kilowatt-hour battery, which is pretty small by new electric car standards. The official range is 190 miles, but there is a bigger battery version, the Cooper SE, which has a 49.2 kilowatt-hour battery and a more usable 250-mile range.
And which car do you have?
This is the bigger battery in mid-spec exclusive trim with the level 2 pack added. And it means that in total this is almost £40,000.
£40,000.
Yes. What about yours?
That is quite a lot. Well, I actually thought this was quite expensive. So as I said earlier, this is the Cooper S, and it's in range topping sport trim. Plus it has the level 3 equipment package added. So that's the top equipment package. And it's pretty much the most expensive petrol version of the new Mini you can buy.
Okay.
And it costs about £35,000, so quite a lot less than yours.
Right. But over the long run, will this actually work out cheaper to own?
Well, that's what we're going to find out.
Let's do some more miles.
Okay, so we've done about 70 miles of motorway driving so far today, and the trip computer is telling me this Mini is averaging just over 45 mpg, which I'd say is pretty good. In other respects though, this is not the best motorway car. So as you can probably hear, there is a lot of road noise, and that becomes quite draining after half an hour or so on the motorway. And on top of that, the ride is fairly choppy. And then my third complaint concerns these head restraints here. So they are fixed and they are angled forwards. So I just want to sit back in the seat properly, but I can't do that without forcing my head forwards at an uncomfortable angle. So all of that is not ideal. But on the plus side, I do have what looks like about 80% of my fuel tank remaining. So I should easily be able to get up to Birmingham, back down to London again, without even stopping to fill up.
That is not the case for me because I am in the electric Mini, and this definitely will not manage the journey there and back without stopping to charge. Luckily, it does look like I will make it to Birmingham without having to stop. But when I got in the car at the start of the day, it told me, fully charged, I was going to have 260 miles worth of range before the battery ran out. We have so far covered 125 miles, but my range has dropped down to 80 miles. So the car thinks that we've done about 180 miles when in reality we've done 125. So that means I can't really trust this predicted range, and I will definitely have to stop somewhere, probably on the way back tomorrow. The car is also saying that I'm managing 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour in terms of efficiency. Now if that's true, that's not so bad for an electric car that's mostly been on the motorway. However, we have seen in the past lots of electric cars lie about their efficiency in their trip computers. So we'll have to do all of those calculations at the end to work out how efficient this really is. Anyway, numbers aside, this has actually been quite a pleasant car to do these miles in. Performance is really punchy, so it's great on the motorway, and it delivers its power very smoothly. It is a bit noisy in here though, but it's got a nice comfortable driving position, and overall, this is fairly impressive. Right, so we've made it to the outskirts of Birmingham. Before we do some city driving, let's take a closer look at the interiors of these cars. Now, we've already mentioned that fundamentally the electric Mini Cooper is very, very similar inside to the petrol version. And what do you make of the quality in both cars?
Well, we're in the electric car now, and as you said, I think the look of the interior is very similar, and actually I quite like it. I think, you know, there are a lot of bland interiors in the small car class, a lot of grey plastic, whereas here you've got some fabric up here on the dashboard, on the sides of the doors, a lot of different colours and textures. And I think if someone were to get in this car in a showroom, they would feel like they're in something quite special.
But what about the actual quality of it?
So actual quality, I would say, is a backward step compared with the previous generation Mini, because you've got some veneers of fabric up here on the dashboard, as I said, but underneath it, you can hear there's a lot of hard, hollow plastic there, whereas previously you would have found a lot of soft touch materials, the same on this centre console down here. So I would say by small car standards, this interior is good enough. It's arguably even one of the better small car interiors for quality, because the Audi A1, that's no longer as good as it used to be. But it is a shame that it's taken a bit of a backward step compared with the previous generation car. And I think if you owned a previous generation Mini, or you do now, you might be a little bit disappointed when you get in this car.
But remember as well, the previous Mini was a very, very high benchmark
Class
for
leading
small car interiors. But still, it is a shame that this hasn't moved things on or even matched what it was offering before. But in terms of the driving position in here, really this is very similar to the old car, but there is a difference between the electric version and the petrol one, in that in this electric model you sit higher. You can't put the seat as low as you can in the petrol car.
Yeah, I think that's the case in most EVs. If you think about the positioning of the battery, that means the driver's seat has to be mounted a little bit higher. I personally like the fact that you can drop the seat lower in the petrol car that I've been driving, but I think this is fundamentally still a very good driving position.
Yep, I agree, but I don't have a problem at all with the slightly higher sitting position in this electric car. It's not like you're towering over the dashboard and it's really awkward and unnatural at all.
What about this thing here?
Well, we're talking about interior quality not being as good as the previous car, and it's also the case that this infotainment system is definitely not as good as the previous car. Every Mini Cooper that you buy has this circular touchscreen that's mounted on the dashboard, and really if this was a tablet that you would just use on the sofa at home, you would probably think this looks quite fun, but it's pretty rubbish. And yet this is attached to a car that could be doing 70 miles an hour while you're having to operate it. So the problems are things like the response time from some of the swiping being a little bit inconsistent, sometimes slow to react to what you're doing.
The graphics are quite good, aren't they?
The graphics are really good, but there are so many menus, so many sub-menus. A lot of these icons are really small and difficult to hit. And it just seems like there hasn't been enough thought about how people are going to use this while they're driving.
Yeah, it's surprising really, because if you think Mini is owned by BMW. BMW has some of the best infotainment systems out there, not just in terms of the gadgets that they have and the features, but also usability. And that's not something that you would say is particularly great about this car. I mean, look at some of these icons down the bottom here. They're a bit of a struggle to hit when you're even parked up.
And look at how many menus that bring this up. And you've got to scroll through them still. So that is a real shame. There's also no physical controls for the air conditioning.
Yeah, that's another thing. In the previous generation Mini, you had some nice dials and buttons down here for the air conditioning. And now, well, you've got them up here, tiny little buttons, icons, and they're just quite difficult to use. Although, I'm told this has a brilliant voice control system, so that won't be a problem, I'm sure.
Okay, should we try and use it?
Okay. Hey Mini, please turn the air conditioning to 23 degrees.
Climate system on.
So what it's done there is turn the climate control on.
On, but not 23 degrees to 20 degrees.
Well, that, details.
So that's the thing, you use these voice control systems, in theory, they solve all the problems with lack of physical controls, but in reality, a lot of the time, they're just not good enough.
And also, a lot of the time, they're more distracting than having to prod the screen.
A little dog comes up and says hi.
And why does anyone need that?
Yeah, I'm not convinced really. I think some people might find that quite endearing, but others will just find it annoying. And I think the longer you own this car, you'll probably fall into the latter camp.
Yes, I agree. And it's also a shame because you've still got some physical controls down here, but none for the air conditioning. It is quite good, I must say, having the gear selector down here and the start-stop button. That falls really easily to hand and is very convenient to use.
Yeah, I agree.
But these switches themselves don't actually feel particularly good quality. They just feel quite plasticky. Now, previous Minis had some nice toggle switches which actually felt good. The damping was pretty plush as well. This isn't quite so good in this car.
Yeah, Mini's got rid of all chrome in the latest car, so that's where you notice this sort of rose gold satin effect. Whereas previously, obviously, you had a lot of chrome switches down there.
Sure. Anyway, it's not the case that this is the worst car interior ever made.
Far from it.
It's just a shame that the previous Mini was so good, and this really does feel like a backward step compared to that.
It does in terms of quality and usability, I would agree.
Anyway, what we should do now is reset the trip computers and do some driving in town, because so far we've only been on the motorway. But the reality is you're not going to buy either of these cars to go up and down the motorway. So let's see what they're like in town.
Right, we are winding our way into Birmingham city centre now. And in many ways, this Mini feels more at home here than it did earlier on the motorway. The compact dimensions definitely helped to make this car easy to thread through traffic. The steering isn't too heavy, and this is a smooth car to drive as well. The brakes and accelerator, they're very consistent in their responses. And also the automatic gearbox, you get an auto as standard on all versions of the Mini now. That isn't at all jerky, even in stop-start traffic. In fact, the only complaint I have is that ride, because it's still pretty firm.
So the Mini Electric was good on the motorway, and it's even better around town. The power delivery continues to be very smooth, and importantly for town driving, the brake pedal feel is fantastic in this Mini Electric. On top of that, the steering is nicely weighted, it's light, perfect around town. It's very easy to judge the dimensions of the car. And also speed bumps, potholes, manhole covers, broken bits of road, they're all soaked up pretty impressively in this car. So Will, we've made it to the Chinese Quarter of Birmingham, and that is a nod to the fact that the Mini Electric which I'm driving isn't actually built at the Mini factory in Oxford.
Okay.
It is instead built in a place called Zhangjiagang.
Okay, I'm assuming that is in China.
Well, it is the Oxford of China. I'm sure I pronounced it perfectly as well. But that's where production will start for the Mini Electric. Eventually, though, it will move back to the Oxford factory from about 2026, it's expected. But anyway, aside from where it's built, how have you got on today in the petrol version of the car?
A bit mixed, really. I think in a lot of ways it's very similar to the previous generation Mini, because obviously it is based on the same platform. And that means that the ride, okay, this is a range stopping sport model, but it's fairly firm. It's quite a noisy car on the motorway, not particularly well suited to that. Better around town though. But how about the Mini Electric? How have you got on
I've
with
actually
that?
found it to be really impressive. It's got strong performance, very easy and smooth to drive. The ride is on the firm side, but it actually soaks up speed bumps and broken roads really pretty well. So it doesn't feel like the short straw at all that I'm in it, apart from maybe the fact that tomorrow I am going to have to work out where to charge it.
And obviously fun is important for a Mini, so we need to find out which is more fun to drive, but I am definitely looking forward to driving that car tomorrow.
Great, okay. Well,
Should we get some dinner?
let's go.
Okay, it's day 2, but before we set off back down to London, we're just going to have a quick look at these cars' boots. So Mini has never been the most practical car in the world, it still isn't.
Sure.
In fact, this 4th generation car has pretty much the same size boot as the previous generation model. So as you can see, not very big. I do get a height adjustable boot floor though, and if I take that out, obviously I'd have to find somewhere to throw that, then I can fit a bit more in there. And I have tried this earlier, and I can fit 3 of these carry-on size suitcases under the parcel shelf. There you go, 3. And just to prove I can close the boot, parcel shelf is down.
It's closed.
There you go. So if you consider that a Skoda Fabia about the same size as this, that can fit 6 carry-on suitcases under its parcel shelf.
This is not very
then
good, is it?
this is not very good. But is your electric car any better?
Well, as we mentioned, completely different car, completely different platform. However, the boot is exactly the same as your petrol version. There is one difference. I've got the level 2 pack added to this Mini, which gives the upgraded sound system and means that I've got this subwoofer under the boot floor, which takes up loads of space.
That is a big subwoofer, isn't it?
It means that, yes, I've still got a height adjustable boot floor, which I can put in one of 2 positions. In its highest, there's pretty much no loading lip, and its lowest, you've got a little bit more storage. But I can still only fit, not even 3, but just 2 suitcases in the back. Now, 3 is terrible. This is among one of the worst boots of any car on sale.
You may as well buy a Mazda MX-5.
Pretty much. And on top of this, of course, because it's electric, I've got to carry this around with me as well.
Okay.
Now, that will fit in with these 2 suitcases, but it still takes up a pretty considerable amount of room, even on its own.
Can you not put that cable under the bonnet?
Well, I wish I could, but there is no storage under the bonnet of this car.
That is a bit of a missed opportunity, given that it's an electric car.
On an
I would
electric
say.
car platform.
Yes.
That's a shame. Anyway, terrible boots, but are they brilliant in the rear seats?
Well, should we have a look at my car first?
Let's go. So, Will, what's it like in the back?
As you can see, I am very, very comfortable back here. It's almost like a limo.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I do have no knee room at all. I've just about managed to squeeze myself in here. It wasn't easy, I promise you. This seat in front here is set up for my driving position. I'm just over 6 foot tall. So clearly if someone was shorter and they were sitting in front, then I would have a bit more knee room, but headroom is absolutely terrible. As you can see, my neck is cocked sideways, and that's probably partly because this car has a sunroof. I suspect it will be a little bit better on a model without that. But yeah, I really wouldn't want to do a long journey back here.
Shall we see if the electric car's any better?
I really do hope so.
So, in the back of the electric model, is it identical there?
Getting in is just as difficult as it was in the petrol car. They're both 3 doors, of course. You can actually get a 5-door version of the petrol, but not of this electric model. And knee room, I would say, is just as bad because I don't have any at all.
Sure.
I'm wedged in here just as much as I was in the other car. On the plus side, the seat base is actually a little bit more comfortable in this electric model, and I have noticeably more headroom. This car does have a sunroof as well, but it doesn't extend quite so far back. So look, if I sit up right there, then yeah, my head is just touching the ceiling, but I'm not cowering in quite the same way I was in the petrol model.
Sure. But ultimately, both cars are terrible when it comes to practicality, aren't they?
Far more practical small cars to choose from.
And even though this is perhaps a victory in the rear seats for the electric car, it's not by much at all.
No, I don't think it's going to play a huge part in your buying decision. There are far more practical small cars to choose from, so yes, this is slightly better, but the difference is marginal.
But Minis have never been known for their practicality, have they?
No, they haven't.
Instead, they've been known for their go-kart driving feel.
Maximum go-kart.
Maximum go-kart. So let's see if that really is the case.
Let's go.
Before I could get cracking in my Mini Electric, because I couldn't charge it overnight where we were staying, my first job was to stop for a top-up. In it goes, and it appears to be working at the minute. I say working, it's not actually charging. Please insert plug into your vehicle. I've done that. Running, but it's still telling me to... Here we go. Charging. Relatively simple. However, this is the second charge that we've been to today, because the one that was round the corner from the hotel was roped off because the parking lines around it were being painted. Oh look, it's all taped up. But we have made it here. We're now paying 85 pence per kilowatt hour, which is very, very expensive. This can accept a maximum charging speed of 95 kilowatts, but so far I've only seen about 65 kilowatts, which is a shame. Anyway, my plan is I'm down to 24%. I've only got 49 miles of predicted range. I've got about 100 miles that I'm going to have to do today. I want to give myself a safe buffer in this, so I don't spend a fortune at this fast charger. I want to get to around 60% so that I can comfortably do those 100 miles and give it a full charge back at base to then crunch the numbers. 23 minutes later, I caught back up with Will and we headed to some B roads.
Okay, so we are on a typical British country road, the sort of road that Mini would like to think this car is ideally suited to, because it talks about how much like a go-kart it feels to drive. In fact, there's even a go-kart mode down here, which I shall engage now. That sharpens up the accelerator response and adds a bit of weight to the steering. You get a silly noise and a different display here on the central touchscreen. But cliches aside, which probably came from people like me back in the 1960s, to be honest, when the original Mini was on sale, this car doesn't actually feel anything like a go-kart to drive at all. That's not to say it's bad. It actually handles quite well up to about 7 or 8 tenths, because body control is good, there's not much lean through corners, steering's heavy and it's direct, it's quite quick as well. So it gives you the impression that it's quite sporty. It does flatter to deceive though. So like the previous generation car, which shares a lot in common with this, it's effectively a heavy facelift. When you start to push harder, you realise there's not a particularly great sense of connection with the front end of the car. And there's also some understeer, so when you push hard, you do notice the front wheels start to run wide of where you want them to go earlier than you might imagine. So that's not ideal, but as I said, as long as you're driving quickly rather than to this car's limits, then you will find it quite fun to drive. This is the Cooper S, as I mentioned earlier, so it has a 2-litre petrol engine with an automatic gearbox. The gearbox is good in manual mode, it responds quickly, and when you rev the engine out, it sounds pretty good. Now, being an electric car, this Mini Cooper Electric obviously doesn't have an engine note. But what it does have are some different experiences you can put the car in, which give you some noises when you accelerate. So, if you really want, you can have this weird spaceship noise, but you can also just turn that off if you prefer. And when you do, you can focus on the calm, quiet, smooth
electric power delivery that this offers, because this really does feel very urgent in the way that it delivers its pace. Really quick and powerful for a small electric car, of course. The handling's also responsive and alert with well-weighted steering, and to be honest, on a twisty road like this, it's pretty tidy. It doesn't feel like a go-kart, but it does feel like a small electric car that offers pretty tidy handling. So we've both driven both cars.
We have.
And surprisingly, it's the heavier one which is better on these twisty roads.
I think overall that is true. As you said, the electric car is quite a bit heavier, and it does feel it on these undulating roads. You get a bit more bounce through the body, but in some ways I'd prefer that, because the petrol car is very firm, follows every little imperfection in the road. Bigger bumps can knock it offline as well. And also the steering, yes, you get a bit more torque steer, so when you accelerate up corners you get a bit more tugging through the wheel in the electric car than you do in the petrol, but you also get a better sense of connection with the front wheels.
Sure, and the impacts on the suspension of the petrol car are really pretty harsh on these roads here, and it's not particularly comfortable. It certainly prefers smoother roads, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'd agree. And also, as I said, it is heavier, but I think it has a better balance front to rear than the petrol car, which feels quite light on the front end.
Sure, but really the perception of some people might be that Minis are hilariously fun to drive, thrilling, hot hatch kind of cars, but the reality is that isn't really the case, is it?
No, look, I think both of them are quite fun to drive in their own ways. The electric car has the edge, but by a small margin. But I think when you factor in the overall package, those looks, the interior, certainly showrooms very well, feels pretty smart inside, certainly by class standards. One or two usability issues maybe, but you can see why a lot of people buy them.
You can, and now we've driven them on the motorway, we've driven them on country roads, we've looked at their interiors, compared their practicality. The final thing to do though is see whether the long-term ownership costs between the electric and the petrol versions are really wildly different or not. So for this actual test, we did have different trim levels, but if we're looking at finances over a few years, let's pretend that they were equivalent trim levels to keep it fair. So we will take a Mini Cooper Electric SE Sport with the Level 2 pack added, and a Mini Cooper Petrol S Sport with a Level 2 pack added.
Sure, and if we do that and look at brochure prices, if you walked into a dealer and bought these cars outright with cash, then you'd be spending £7,000 more on the electric version. That gap does narrow to about £6,000 if you factor in discounts, because right now you can get bigger savings on the electric car if you're prepared to haggle.
But still quite a big difference between the two cars. However, can you earn some of that money back in fuel savings or electricity savings?
Well, my Petrol Cooper S wasn't especially economical on the trip. It averaged 30.5 mpg. Now, there was some fast motorway driving, obviously, and we did have some harder driving on the country roads, but not a particularly great figure. And I filled up at a motorway service station, one of the more expensive places you can buy fuel in the UK. So on the day, it cost me £71.67 in petrol. And even based on the average price of petrol at the moment, then that trip would have cost me £60.46.
Okay.
What about you?
Well, I obviously did the same journey as you. It was 279 miles, and in the Cooper Electric, I averaged 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, which isn't particularly great, and was also a lot less than what the car was claiming it managed.
Yeah, it's probably worth pointing out that we are factoring in charging losses here. So we're looking at how much energy was transferred from the grid into the car, and the car's trip computer won't be doing that. But still, 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour isn't particularly great by electric car standards.
And the actual cost of the trip was £62.55 using the fast public charging network as I did, which is less than motorway service station fuel, but more than the average price of petrol for the same journey in a very inefficient petrol Mini Cooper. So that is also quite disappointing. But there are a few different calculations we can do here to make it more perhaps representative of doing that journey for a typical electric car owner. So for example, if my final charge was at home, using the energy price cap of 22.4p per kilowatt hour, then that would drop my costs down to £33.63.
Wow.
A lot less than what you'd spend in a fuel car. And if you had a 7 pence per kilowatt hour overnight tariff, which we know is available, then that would drop my costs down again to just over £25.
Okay, so if we take my car's fuel economy for this particular trip, and we extrapolate it over 3 years and 36,000 miles, then based on the average price of petrol at the moment, I would be spending almost £8,000 on fuel.
That is a lot of money. If I did the same number of miles over the same amount of time, if I only charged at home at the price cap of 22.4 pence per kilowatt hour, then that would cost me just over £2,300, which is a lot less than the fuel costs, and brings the cars much closer together over 3 years in terms of overall costs.
It does, but we also have to consider depreciation. Now, the petrol Coupe S is expected to hold its value quite a bit better than the electric car. So the electric car is predicted to lose around half of its value during 3 years. Now, that's not unusual by new car standards because, of course, during the first 3 years of ownership, you will lose quite a lot of the car's value. But it's still not particularly great by Mini standards, and the petrol car is expected to be worth around 57%. We haven't plucked these figures out of the air. They are from a company called CAP HPI, who is the industry leader at providing resale values. But it is also worth pointing out that there is some guesswork involved because, of course, no one's quite sure what the legislation is going to be around electric cars and petrol cars in 3 years' time, or what the cost of electricity and petrol is going to be at that point. But at the moment, as it stands, it's expected that the petrol car will be worth quite a bit more after 3 years.
Okay, a few other things to factor into the costs. Insurance, they're actually very similar between the two cars, which might be a surprise to some people. The petrol car is more expensive when it comes to servicing. And if you factor all of that in, everything that we've spoken about, then over 3 years, the electric car is still more expensive, but only by £1,500.
That's a smaller difference than I thought, actually.
It is a lot smaller than the initial £7,000 difference in terms of list price. Now, of course, depending on your charging habits, whether you use a very cheap overnight tariff, that could make it even better value. But equally, if you use a very expensive, fast public charging network, then that could bring your costs up. So that could change. But if you charge at home, then it is £1,500 difference to have the electric car. If you look at a monthly PCP finance deal, then the electric car is more expensive again. It's £449 per month versus £389 per month in the petrol. That's based on a £4,000 deposit, 10,000 miles a year for 3 years. But even though the electric car is more expensive, I think in this test, we've shown that it's the better overall car.
I think it fundamentally is. Now, it's not going to suit everyone. If you don't have off-street parking and you're not able to charge up at home, then it's going to be not particularly convenient, and it's obviously going to be more expensive. But if you can fit an electric car into your lifestyle and you want a Mini, then I think the electric version is the way to go.
Okay, well, there you go. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to see another one, then click up there and make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. And if you want a great deal on the Mini Electric or the Mini Petrol or any other new car, click on that link to go to whatcar.com.